My grandfather always told me never to open the old room at the end of the hallway. He said some doors are locked for a reason. But after his death, when I found the key hidden in his jacket, my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I thought I would discover family secrets. I never imagined I would discover him. This is the story of how I uncovered my grandfather's final secret, and why I should have left it buried forever. Callum Rives had not been back to his grandfather's countryside house in years. It stood at the very edge of a forgotten road, surrounded by tall, bending trees that seemed to watch every step he took. The evening was quiet, too quiet, and even the birds had gone silent as he walked toward the old wooden porch. The house looked tired, as if it had been waiting too long. Its windows were dusty, its paint cracked and peeling, and the front door leaned slightly on broken hinges. Callum hesitated for a moment, staring at it, before pulling the key from his pocket. It was the same heavy brass key his mother had given him after the funeral. She had told him, "Your grandfather wanted only you to have it." When the door creaked open, the air that escaped was thick and stale, carrying the scent of dust, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped inside. Shadows stretched across the living room, where old furniture sat under white sheets, like ghosts frozen in place. On the mantel above the fireplace, Callum noticed a row of family photographs, their glass frames cloudy with age. In every picture, his grandfather, Elias Rives, stood tall and stern, his eyes sharp even in black and white. But the strange thing was, his expression never changed. The same faint frown, the same cold stare, in every photo. As Callum moved deeper into the room, he noticed a small wooden box on the table. It was dark, heavy, and carved with his grandfather's initials, Yar. The box was locked with a strange metal clasp that looked older than the house itself. Callum touched it gently, and for a second, he thought he heard a faint sound, a whisper low and distant, almost like someone calling his name. He quickly pulled his hand away and looked around. The house was empty, or at least it should have been. Callum decided to explore the house before opening the wooden box. The silence inside felt heavy, pressing against his ears. Every step he took made the old floor groan as if the house itself did not welcome him back. He slowly climbed the staircase, brushing his hand along the dusty railing. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the wallpaper was peeling in long, curled strips. Upstairs, the air was colder, and a faint draft slipped through the cracks of the attic door. Something inside him told him not to go up there, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He pulled the cord that dangled from the ceiling, and the attic stairs unfolded with a loud creak. Dust rained down, filling the air and making him cough. With careful steps, Callum climbed into the attic. It smelled of old paper and rotting wood. Faded trunks, broken chairs, and boxes were piled everywhere. The weak light from the single round window barely touched the corners of the room, leaving most of it in shadow. As he searched, Callum noticed an old jacket hanging on a rusty nail. It looked out of place, as though someone had left it there recently. He pulled it down and shook off the thick dust. The pockets felt strangely heavy. Reaching inside, his fingers touched something cold and rough. He pulled it out and stared. It was a rusty key, long and hand-carved, its edges jagged like teeth. The strange thing was, it looked ancient, but when he held it, it felt warm in his hand, almost alive. A shiver ran down his spine. Why would his grandfather keep such a key hidden inside an attic jacket? Just then, Callum thought he heard footsteps on the floor below, slow, heavy, and dragging. He froze, clutching the key tightly. His heart pounded in his chest as the sound stopped, silence filling the house once more. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to believe it was only the house settling. But deep down he knew the truth. He was not alone. Callum left the attic with the strange key still clutched in his hand. His palms were damp with sweat, and every sound in the house seemed sharper now. The wind outside brushed against the cracked windows, making them rattle like faint whispers. Downstairs, he entered his grandfather's study. It was a small dark room, lined with tall shelves of dusty books. The curtains were drawn tight, letting in almost no light, so Callum lit the old oil lamp on the desk. Its flame flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the walls. On the desk, beneath stacks of yellowed papers, he found something unusual, a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the leather almost falling apart, but the initials YAR were still visible on the front. It belonged to Elias Rives. Callum carefully opened the book. The handwriting inside was shaky and uneven, but still readable. At first, the entries seemed normal. His grandfather wrote about the weather, farm work, and lonely nights. But soon the writing changed. I hear them again, the voices in the walls. They whisper when the house grows quiet. Another page read, I saw the shadow standing at the foot of my bed. It waits for me to close my eyes. It wants me to feed it. Callum's skin crawled as he turned the pages. The words grew darker, filled with desperation. One passage stopped him cold. The thing I trapped long ago is not gone. It lives still, behind the mirror. It is hungry. It is waiting for the next of blood. The next page was stained with something dark, something that looked like dried blood. Callum's throat went dry. He shut the journal quickly, his heart thundering. His grandfather had never spoken about anything like this. To Callum, Elias was always a quiet, serious man who kept to himself. But now, he realized his grandfather had been hiding something terrible. As he set the journal back down, Callum noticed the flame of the oil lamp flicker violently, though there was no wind. Then, from somewhere deep in the hallway, came a soft, broken whisper. Callum! The whisper froze Callum in place. He stood perfectly still in the study, his eyes darting toward the hallway. The lamp flickered weakly, and the silence afterward was so heavy it made his ears ring. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but deep down he knew it wasn't. Slowly, he stepped out of the study and into the hallway. The air here felt different, colder, heavier, as if he were walking into a place where time had stopped. The long corridor stretched before him, lined with family portraits. Each painting seemed to watch him as he walked past, their painted eyes glinting in the dim light. At the very end of the hallway he saw it. A door he had never noticed before. It looked older than the rest, its surface cracked and splintered, the wood darkened by age. Strange markings scratched into the frame made it stand out even more. How had he never seen this door before, even as a child? Callum's heart raced as he approached it. He reached for the handle. It was iron cold to the touch, almost painfully so. He tried turning it, but it was locked tight. Then he remembered the key. Slowly, he pulled the rusty, hand-carved key from his pocket. His fingers trembled as he lifted it toward the lock. To his shock, the key slid imperfectly, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. For a second, Callum hesitated. His grandfather's words from the journal echoed in his head. The thing I trapped long ago is not gone. His breath quickened, his body tense. He thought about turning back, leaving the house, forgetting everything. But curiosity, dark, dangerous curiosity, was stronger. With a shaky breath, Callum twisted the key. The lock clicked loudly, echoing down the hallway. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but a black void beyond. And then, as the gap widened, a whisper drifted out, clearer this time, chilling his blood. Welcome back, Callum. The door swung open slowly, and a wave of icy air spilled into the hallway. Callum's breath turned shaky as he stepped inside. The air was different here, thicker, heavier, carrying the faint scent of burnt wax and old smoke. The room was small but strange, unlike any other part of the house. The walls were covered with symbols carved into the wood, deep lines that twisted in shapes he did not recognize. Some of the carvings looked fresh, as though someone had traced them again and again to keep them alive. The floor was littered with melted candles, their wax hardened into long, frozen drips. Dark stains, black and brown, marked the floorboards, and Callum couldn't tell if it was dried wax or something else. In one corner sat a row of glass jars, each filled with a gray powdery substance, almost like ash. At the very center of the room stood a tall object, hidden beneath a heavy black cloth. Its shape was sharp and rectangular. Callum's heart thudded in his chest as he realized what it was. A mirror. He swallowed hard. His grandfather's journal came back to his mind. The words about the thing I trapped long ago, and behind the mirror. His hands trembled as he stepped closer. Every instinct told him to turn back, to close the door and leave, but his curiosity pulled him forward. The air grew colder the nearer he came, and he thought he heard faint scratching sounds from beneath the cloth, like fingernails scraping on glass. Callum reached out with shaking fingers. He gripped the cloth. For a long moment he stood frozen, his chest rising and falling quickly, his breath loud in the silence. Then slowly, carefully, he pulled the cloth away. The mirror stood tall, its frame black and cracked with age. But the strangest part was its surface. It wasn't dull or dusty. Instead, it gleamed brightly, almost too brightly, as though it had been waiting for someone to look into it. And when Callum leaned forward, his stomach dropped, because the reflection staring back at him was not his own. Callum's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the mirror. He expected to see himself, dust on his clothes, fear in his eyes, but the reflection was different. In the glass stood Callum Rives, his grandfather. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were sunken, dark holes staring back at Callum. He wasn't moving like a reflection should. Instead, he stood completely still, his body too sharp, too real, as if he were trapped behind the glass. Callum stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the melted candles. His voice trembled. "Grandfather," he whispered. The figure in the mirror tilted its head slowly. The movement was unnatural, jerky, as if the bones in his neck were too stiff. Then his lips began to move, but no sound came out. The glass fogged slightly, as though he were breathing from the other side. Callum's heart pounded wildly. He stepped closer, almost against his will, until his face was only inches from the surface. That was when he realized something even stranger. The room behind him did not appear in the reflection. The shelves, the symbols, the jars of ash gone. Only endless blackness stretched behind his grandfather's image. Suddenly, the mirror shuddered, and a faint sound filled the room. A whisper. Soft, broken, almost like words. Callum pressed his hands against his ears, but the whisper was inside his head. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was sharp, cold, and heavy with sorrow. Callum staggered back, his breath coming fast. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy, as though the floor itself was holding him in place. Then his grandfather's reflection lifted one hand and pressed it against the glass. Slowly, black cracks spread outward from the spot, crawling across the mirror like veins. The surface pulsed as if alive, glowing faintly. Callum's instincts screamed at him to leave, to shut the door forever. But his eyes were locked on the mirror. He could not look away. And then, for the first time, his grandfather's hollow mouth formed clear words. "Too late." The word echoed in Callum's mind. Too late. He stumbled backward, his chest tightening as fear gripped him. The air in the room grew icy cold, and his breath came out in pale clouds. The flame of the candles flickered wildly, even though no wind touched them. Suddenly, the journal he had left on the desk flew open on its own. Its pages flipped rapidly, the sound loud in the silence. Callum's eyes locked on the words written in dark, heavy ink. Do not look into the mirror after midnight. Callum's stomach dropped. His eyes darted to the wall clock in the hallway. The hand ticked past 12. Midnight. The whisper returned, clearer this time, crawling through the room like smoke. Callum. It was his grandfather's voice, but warped, stretched, broken as though two people spoke at once. Callum covered his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside him, rattling in his skull. He backed away toward the door, but it slammed shut with a violent crash. The handle twisted on its own, locking him inside. Panic surged through his chest. He grabbed the frame, pulling with all his strength, but it didn't budge. Behind him, the mirror began to ripple. Its surface moved like water, bending and shifting, and the reflection of Elias Rives smiled for the first time. It was not a kind smile. It was sharp wrong, stretched too wide. Too late. The voice repeated, this time louder, closer. Callum's heart pounded like a drum. He pressed himself against the door, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Stop this. You're not real, he shouted, but his voice cracked with terror. The mirror pulsed again, and from its depths came a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging against glass. The sound grew louder, faster, as if something inside was desperate to claw its way out. And then the whisper turned into a scream, a deep, hollow sound that shook the entire room. The glass quivered, and black cracks spread farther across the mirror's surface. Callum's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, his eyes fixed in horror as the mirror began to bleed shadows. The mirror shook violently, its frame rattling as if something inside was trying to break free. Black cracks spread across the glass like veins, and from those cracks, dark liquid shadows began to seep out. They slid down the mirror's surface and spilled onto the floor, moving like thick smoke but heavier, alive. Callum scrambled backward, his hands pressing against the wooden floor. His breath came in sharp gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. The shadows spread quickly, crawling across the floorboards, twisting and forming into shapes. At first, they looked like long fingers reaching out, but then they grew taller, stretching into human-like figures with hollow faces. The room grew colder with each passing second. The candles that had burned dimly before suddenly flared back to life, their flames bending sideways as if pulled by the darkness. The carved symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, like they were reacting to the shadow's presence. Callum tried to stand, but his legs trembled so badly he nearly fell again. One of the shadow figures turned its head toward him. Its face was empty, only a black void where eyes and a mouth should be. Slowly, it lifted its arm, its long finger-like claws stretching toward him. No, stay away! Callum shouted, his voice breaking. The shadows did not stop. They crept closer, circling him, their movements jerky, unnatural, like broken puppets dancing without strings. The sound of whispering filled the room, but it wasn't just one voice. It was many overlapping, chanting words he could not understand. Callum pressed his back against the wall, clutching the rusty key in his fist as if it could protect him. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his face, his body frozen in terror. One shadow lunged forward, its claw brushing the side of his neck. A sharp, icy pain cut into his skin, leaving a thin red line. Callum gasped, his whole body shaking. The mirror pulsed again, and the shadows moved faster, their whispers growing louder, as if they were celebrating. And then Callum realized the truth. These things weren't just coming for him. They were trying to drag him into the mirror. The shadows pressed closer, their hollow faces leaning toward Callum, as if smelling his fear. He swung the rusty key wildly, desperate to keep them away. To his surprise, each time the key passed through a shadow, the figure flinched back, hissing like smoke touched by fire. But there were too many of them. Callum's chest tightened as his grandfather's words from the journal echoed in his mind. The thing I trapped long ago is not gone. It lives still, behind the mirror. It is hungry. It is waiting for the next of blood. The words struck him like ice. The mirror wasn't just a reflection, it was a prison. And the thing inside wasn't Elias at all. It was something older, darker. His grandfather had trapped it there decades ago, using strange symbols and endless sacrifices. But every prison needs a guard. And now, Elias's reflection made sense. His grandfather had not been living peacefully all those years. He had been the keeper. The mirror demanded a soul from the bloodline, a person to hold it back. And when Elias died, that duty passed to Callum. The shadows circled tighter, their whispers now forming words. Join him, join him, join him. Callum's heart raced as he looked into the mirror. His grandfather's face pressed closer to the glass, eyes wide, lips trembling. For the first time, Callum saw fear in them, true fear. Elias lifted his hand, shaking, pointing directly at Callum as if begging him to understand. No, Callum whispered, shaking his head. I'm not like you. I won't do it. But the mirror pulsed violently, and the shadows screamed. The room shook, dust falling from the ceiling as if the house itself was breaking apart. The key in Callum's hand burned hot, glowing faintly. He dropped it with a cry, clutching his palm where the skin had reddened. He realized too late, the key hadn't been for escape. It had been to lock himself inside. And the mirror had been waiting. The shadows swirled faster around Callum, their bodies twisting like smoke caught in a storm. The mirror pulsed with a low hum, its cracks glowing faintly as though it were alive. The reflection of Elias pressed both hands against the glass, his mouth opening in a silent scream. His eyes begged Callum to understand, but it was already too late. Callum stumbled backward, but the shadows pushed him closer to the mirror. Their long, claw-like fingers grabbed at his arms, his legs, his chest, dragging him forward. He kicked and shouted, his voice echoing through the cursed room. Let me go. The mirror's surface rippled like water. Callum's reflection appeared for the first time, but it was wrong. His face was twisted, pale, his eyes black and hollow. It grinned at him, stretching its mouth far wider than humanly possible. No. Callum screamed, clawing at the floor. His nails scraped wood, leaving bloody marks as he tried to resist. But the pull was too strong. His body lifted from the ground, dragged toward the glowing surface. With a final burst of strength, he reached out, trying to grab the doorframe. His fingers brushed it, but then the shadows yanked him hard. His body slammed against the mirror with a deafening crack. For one horrifying second, Callum's face pressed flat against the glass. His wide eyes stared out, filled with terror, as his hands pounded uselessly against the surface. Then with a sickening pull, he was dragged inside. The room fell silent. The shadows vanished, the candles went out, and the mirror smoothed over as if nothing had happened. But inside the glass, a new image appeared. No longer Elias. Now it was Callum, his face pale, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes begging for help. He had taken his grandfather's place. The house grew still again, waiting for the next visitor. And in the dark silence, the faintest whisper slipped from the mirror. Welcome home. They say every family carries secrets, but some secrets should never be uncovered. Callum thought he was only opening a door, but what he really opened was a prison. Now his grandfather is finally free, and Callum is the one trapped in the mirror, waiting for the next bloodline. So if you ever find an old key, if you ever see a locked room at the end of the hallway, remember this story. Some doors are locked for a reason.